"Get off that lake or you're going to jail." That's what the HOA president screamed across the water while 3 police cars lined up on the shore, their lights cutting through the morning fog. I sat in my own damn boat on the lake I'd legally bought, wondering how the hell I'd gone from quiet retirement to being treated like a criminal. She stood there like she owned the world, barking orders while the officers hovered hands on their holsters ready to cuff me for fishing on my own property. 3 months earlier, I'd buried my wife, Sarah. I thought buying a little lakeside place would help me breathe again. Peace, quiet, maybe a few mornings with just me in the mist. That's all I wanted. But apparently peace doesn't exist in a neighborhood run by a power-hungry HOA. Her name was Celeste Fairmont. 60, something perfect silver bun, crisp white blouse, clipboard under her arm like a badge of power. "You're trespassing on private property," she shouted, "and contaminating our water supply. Contaminating." I was sitting in a 12-foot aluminum boat tossing a fishing line. I called back, "Ma'am, I own this property. Bought it 3 months ago." But even as I said it, my surveyor instincts kicked in. Something about the shoreline looked wrong. I'd spent 22 years reading land boundaries like others read road signs, and behind Celeste, half hidden in cattails, was an old metal post. Rusted, but unmistakable, a federal marker. Coast Guard issue, the kind used for navigation channels. One of the cops, the older one, saw it too. I could tell by the flicker in his eyes. Celeste noticed his gaze and stepped deliberately in front of it. That told me everything. I kept my calm, packed my gear, and said, "You know what? I'll clear this up properly." Then I left. But my mind was already racing. That marker didn't belong on private property. If I was right, this entire private lake had been stolen from the federal government decades ago. That night, I pulled up the photos on my phone and called the Coast Guard regional office. 12 minutes on hold later, I got a woman named Officer Bin Hartwell. Her tone changed the moment I mentioned a possible 1950s navigation marker. "Mr. Brooks, please provide GPS coordinates." I read them off. She went quiet for a few seconds, then said, "Sir, those coordinates correspond to a federal navigational aid from 1952. We'll send a team to verify." The realization hit hard. If she was right, the lake wasn't private property at all, it was federal land, meaning someone had forged or manipulated documents to make it appear private. And if my deed traced back to Celeste, she'd sold me something she never legally owned. I couldn't sleep that night. The fog outside rolled across the lake like smoke over stolen ground. Sarah used to say I was stubborn, that it would either save me or ruin me. I decided to find out which. The next morning, I drove to the county records office. The clerk, Pearl, was one of those women who knows every story in the county. When I mentioned the property, her eyes lit up. "Oh, honey, that land goes way back. Used to be federal waterway property." Then she scrolled through files. Here it is. Transferred in 1985 to something called Clearwater Development Corporation for $1. $1, I repeated. She nodded. 6 months later, Clearwater sold it to Celeste Fairmont, also for $1. Then the corporation dissolved. I stared at the screen. Every transfer I'd seen in my career had survey coordinates, reference points, legal easements. This one vague, sloppy, almost intentionally obscure. "Pearl," I said quietly, "who signed the Clearwater documents?" She squinted, then looked at me over her glasses. "Well, what do you know? Registered Agent Celeste Fairmont." It hit like a punch. Celeste had created a fake company to steal federal property, then buried the evidence for decades. That night my phone rang. I didn't recognize the number, but the voice was smooth, practiced. "Mr. Brooks, perhaps we got off on the wrong foot. Maybe we can come to an understanding." I let her talk, her tone sweet but sharp underneath. "Sometimes it's better to accept how things are," she said. "Mrs. Fairmont," I replied, "I've spent 22 years finding the truth about property lines. The truth about your boundaries is going to be very uncomfortable." She hung up without a word. 2 days later, Officer Hartwell arrived with a federal team, surveyors, Coast Guard personnel, the works. We hiked to the cattails where I'd seen the post. Within minutes, they uncovered a pristine marker, U.S. Coast Guard Navigation Aid 774 Delta, dated 1952. Hartwell checked her tablet. "This lake is part of a federally protected waterway system," she said. "There's no record of it ever being sold or released to private ownership." The other surveyor crouched, studying the soil around the marker. "Ma'am, he said this has been moved. Repositioned 3 feet from its original base. Concrete shows excavation." My heart sank. That wasn't just fraud, it was tampering with federal property, a serious crime. And the only person with access to that shoreline for decades was Celeste. Hartwell turned to me. "Mr. Brooks, do you have any documentation showing how she acquired this land?" I handed over Pearl's printouts. Her expression darkened. "This is systematic. Shell Corporation falsified deeds, altered boundaries. We're opening a federal investigation effective immediately." I nodded. "Then you should know she's been charging neighbors for fishing access. For years." That got her attention. Charging fees on federal water is another felony. When they left, I stood by the restored marker half buried in mud, realizing I'd just triggered a storm that would change everything. That night I got a text. "Stop asking questions or you'll regret it." 2 days later, an emergency HOA meeting notice landed in my mailbox. The subject, environmental threats caused by Mr. Brooks. The community center was packed. Celeste sat at a table like a judge and Pearl's a projector ready beside her. "We're here," she began, "because one man's reckless actions have endangered our community." Photos flashed on the screen. My boat, the police, the Coast Guard trucks. He's brought federal agents into our neighborhood. He's destroying our property values. The crowd murmured. She had them wrapped around her finger. Then it was my turn. I connected my laptop to the projector, took a breath, and said, "This is what your president's been hiding." Slide 1, a satellite image showing the Kent original federal boundary overlay from 1949. Slide 2 photos of buried Coast Guard markers, proof they'd been moved. Slide 3, the fake transfer documents, Celeste's signature on every line. "This isn't about me fishing," I said. "This is about someone stealing federal property, charging you for access, and lying to you for 20 years. Mrs. Blackwell, an elderly neighbor, stood up. "I've been paying you $200 a year for fishing permits since 2014, she said to Celeste. "If this is federal land, why was I paying you?" Celeste snapped. "I have every right to collect reasonable fees for maintaining our resources." Her words hung in the air, a public confession. 50 witnesses. The next morning, Jake Morrison's article hit the county paper. HOA, President admits to federal crimes during meeting. By noon, the FBI had called me. "Agent Tucker Grayson, Financial Crimes Unit. We need to talk," he said. The following night, Celeste tried to fight back. Another meeting, this time stacked with her supporters. She called me unstable, accused me of lying to destroy her. But halfway through her speech, Agent Grayson himself walked in, flashing his credentials. "Mrs. Fairmont, we need to speak with you about your management of the waterfront property." Silence. The room froze. Celeste's confidence cracked like thin ice. "This meeting is adjourned," she stammered. But it was already over. 48 hours later, I was replacing planks on my dock when a process server handed me a lawsuit. Defamation, emotional distress, $250,000. Her plan was obvious: bury me in legal fees before the feds could finish. Then the rumors started. Posts online calling me unstable. Neighbors whispering I'd lost it after my wife died. It worked for a while. I started doubting myself. Maybe I was too angry. Maybe I'd gone too far. Sarah's voice echoed in my head. "Truth has a weight, Landon. Once you find it, it pulls everything else into place." I held on to that. Then one night my neighbor, Mrs. Henderson, called, voice shaking. She offered me $500 to sign a paper saying I saw you acting erratic. I refused. But she's desperate. Witness tampering. Another felony. I hit record on my phone and headed outside for air. That's when I smelled smoke. Across the lake, orange light flickered in Celeste's backyard. I grabbed my keys and drove over. She was burning documents. HOA records. Bank statements, whatever she could grab. The flames painted her face like a cornered animal's. I stayed on the sidewalk recording. "Mrs. Fairmont, what are you burning?" She spun around. "Get off my property. Those look like HOA financial records. Destroying evidence in a federal investigation is a felony." "Those are my personal papers," she screamed. The fire department arrived first, then the police. Finally, a black SUV pulled up Agent Grayson. He watched for a few seconds, then said calmly, "Mrs. Fairmont, you're under arrest for obstruction of justice and destruction of evidence." The click of the handcuffs was the sound of 20 years of deceit collapsing. In the weeks that followed, the investigation uncovered everything $312,000 in illegal fees, hidden accounts, shell companies, even falsified tax filings. The federal indictment had 12 counts: land fraud wire, fraud money laundering, obstruction conspiracy. I testified at the trial. Her lawyer tried to paint me as a grieving widower who'd imagined a crime, but the evidence was overwhelming. The jury didn't hesitate. Guilty on all counts. When the judge read the sentence, 8 years in federal prison restitution to every resident she'd defrauded, Celeste didn't even blink. She just stared straight ahead, the mask finally gone. Outside the courthouse, I looked back once. The lake had started all of this, the peace I'd wanted, the fraud I'd uncovered, the fight I hadn't asked for. But truth has a way of surfacing no matter how deep you try to bury it. And that's the lesson I learned standing by that water. Some people build empires on lies, but all it takes is one person who refuses to look away to make the whole thing sink.